My father, Joshua, threw my grandmother's savings book onto her grave on January 12th, dirt still fresh, flowers still wrapped in plastic, and said 6 words that would cost him everything he had. "It's useless. Let it stay buried." 11 days later, a bank manager named Mrs. Freeze turned pale as copy paper and whispered, "Miss Wilkerson, whatever you do, do not leave this building." But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Paige Wilkerson. I'm 31 years old, and until recently, I was the most invisible person in my family. I work as a claims processor at Keystone Insurance Group in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I live in a modest apartment on the north side of town, $1,150 a month, utilities not included. I drive a 2017 Hyundai Tucson with a coffee stain on the passenger seat that I've been meaning to clean for approximately 3 years. At this point, the stain and I have developed a relationship. It's not a good relationship, but it's stable. My grandmother, Estelle, passed away on January 8th, 2024. She was 84 years old. Heart failure, peacefully at home, which is exactly how she would have wanted it. Grandma Estelle worked 41 years at Lackawanna Textile Mill in Wilkes-Barre. 41 years of early mornings and tired feet and fabric dust in her lungs. She lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment for 4 decades. She clipped coupons like it was an Olympic sport. She smelled like lavender hand cream and always had butterscotch candies in her purse. Everyone in my family considered her poor, just a factory worker living on Social Security, they'd say. Nothing to her name but that cramped little apartment and some old furniture. Everyone was wrong. My father, Joshua, is 58 years old and works as a regional sales manager for Keystone Medical Supply. He drives a Lexus ES, leased, though he doesn't advertise that part. He wears expensive watches and talks about investments and acts like he comes from old money. Here's the thing about my father. He grew up in that same cramped apartment in Wilkes-Barre. I've seen photographs of him in hand-me-down corduroys and a Kmart t-shirt eating government cheese. The man's revisionist history would make a Soviet propagandist jealous. He was always embarrassed by his mother. When I was young, he'd tell people she was retired rather than admit she worked in a textile mill. He'd visit her maybe 3 times a year, always rushing, always checking his watch. And when he remarried 15 years ago to a woman named Unity, the visits dropped to twice a year, then once, then holidays only, and even those felt like obligations. Unity is 54 and comes from a family that had means, her words, not mine. Her father managed a Buick dealership in Allentown. That's her pedigree, a Buick dealership. But to hear Unity tell it, she grew up in a manor house with servants and fox hunts. She spent 15 years suggesting that Grandma should be put in a facility because the apartment was too cramped to breathe. Once, she made my father skip Thanksgiving at Grandma's because she couldn't bear the thought of eating in such a small space. My brother Clayton is 34. He works in pharmaceutical sales. He is, and has always been, the golden child. When Clayton needed help with his house down payment, Dad wrote a check for $40,000. When Clayton graduated, he got a used BMW as a gift. Still cost $15,000. When Clayton got married, Dad paid for the whole wedding. $35,000 for one day of Tamara complaining about the flower arrangements. Clayton visited Grandma twice a year, Christmas and her birthday. I know because I was usually there when he showed up. He'd stay exactly 20 minutes. I timed it once, 19 minutes and 43 seconds, and yet every time Dad would praise Clayton for making time in his busy schedule. Meanwhile, I visited Grandma every single Sunday for 7 years. Every Sunday. I'd bring pastries from the Polish bakery on Main Street, and we'd drink tea, and she'd show me old photographs and tell me stories about the mill. 7 years of Sundays, and my father never once mentioned it. The funeral was held at Morrison and Sons Funeral Home in Plains Township. A small service, maybe 30 people, mostly Grandma's old co-workers from the mill, some neighbors from her building, a few distant relatives I barely recognized. My father kept checking his watch throughout the service. Unity whispered to him about needing to sort through that apartment quickly before the lease is up. Clayton spent half the service on his phone. Work emergency, he explained, not even bothering to look apologetic. I delivered the only real eulogy. I talked about Grandma's laugh, her butterscotch candies, the way she remembered everyone's birthday even when they forgot hers. My father spoke for 2 minutes about family values and the importance of honoring our elders. He didn't mention a single specific memory. I don't think he had any. After the burial at Hillside Cemetery, the funeral director approached me with a small envelope. He said, "Grandma left specific instructions. This was to be given to her granddaughter Paige directly, not to the family, to me." Inside was an old savings book, leather cover worn soft with age, First Northeastern Savings and Loan, dated 1967. It was older than me. It was older than my father's fake sophistication. Joshua saw me holding it and grabbed it from my hands before I could react. He flipped it open, scanning the pages with that impatient expression he always wore when dealing with anything related to his mother. The last entry was 1989. Balance, $847.52. He laughed. Not a kind laugh. The kind of laugh that has teeth in it. "Mom and her pathetic little savings account from 35 years ago," he said. "This thing is ancient. The account probably closed decades ago when the banks merged. It's useless." And then my father threw my grandmother's savings book on her fresh grave, dirt still dark and loose, and walked away without looking back. Unity followed him, then Clayton, still on his phone, then Tamara, picking her way carefully across the grass in heels that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I stood there, alone, as the January wind cut through my coat. I waited until their cars pulled away, until the cemetery workers started packing up their equipment, until the sun began to set and the shadows grew long across the headstones. Then I walked back to my grandmother's grave. I knelt down and picked up the savings book, brushed the dirt off its cover. The leather was soft in my hands. 57 years of handling had made it supple as cloth. I opened it and looked at her handwriting, careful entries in blue ink, deposits of $30, $50, small amounts recorded with precision. I didn't care about the $847.52, probably gone anyway, absorbed into some bank merger decades ago, but this was the only thing Grandma specifically wanted me to have. She'd left instructions with the funeral director. She'd made sure it would reach me directly, not through my father. Why would she do that if it was worthless? That night, I sat in my apartment holding the savings book as the radiator clanked and the neighbor's TV murmured through the thin walls. I thought about all those Sundays, the tea, the photographs, the stories. Grandma once told me something I didn't understand at the time. She'd taken my hand, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're the only one who sees me, Paige. Remember that. I see you too." I didn't know what she meant then. I was beginning to understand. Now, before we continue, if you're enjoying the story, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I see every single comment, and it means more to me than you know. Thank you so much for your support. The days after the funeral blurred together. I went back to work. I filed claims. I ate lunch alone at my desk. I came home to my quiet apartment and stared at the savings book on my nightstand and did absolutely nothing about it. What was the point? The last entry was 1989. The account was probably closed when the banks merged. I'd go to the bank, they'd tell me there was nothing there, and I'd have confirmation that my grandmother left me exactly what my father said she did, a worthless relic. Part of me didn't want that confirmation. As long as I didn't check, there was still a possibility, still a mystery. Confirming it was empty would feel like losing her all over again. So I waited. 12 days of waiting and working and grieving and convincing myself I'd deal with it, eventually. Meanwhile, my father dealt with things his way. Within a week of the funeral, Joshua announced he was handling Grandma's estate as next of kin. He didn't ask for my input. He didn't even tell me directly. I heard it from Clayton during one of his condescending check-in calls. Dad had already contacted a real estate agent about Grandma's apartment. The lease was paid through February. He wanted it emptied and surrendered by month end. 40 years of my grandmother's life, and he wanted it boxed up and gone in 3 weeks? Then Unity started posting on Facebook. I should have unfollowed her years ago, but I kept her on my feed for the same reason people slow down to look at car accidents: morbid curiosity. And in the week after Grandma's funeral, Unity posted 17 times about vintage finds from the apartment she'd been so reluctant to visit when Grandma was alive. Photos of Grandma's china set, such lovely pieces, keeping these in the family. Photos of some jewelry. Beautiful antiques from Joshua's mother. Photos of a small writing desk Grandma had used for 40 years. This will look perfect in our guest room. Unity posted 17 photos of my grandmother's belongings in 3 days. 17, each with captions about preserving family history. Funny how she couldn't breathe in that apartment when Grandma was alive, but suddenly she's an archaeologist the moment there's something to take. I called my father and asked if I could have one thing, just one. Grandma's music box. A wooden jewelry box that played Moon River when you opened it. She'd received it as a wedding gift in 1961. She'd had it for 63 years. I used to listen to it every Sunday while we had tea. Joshua said he'd check with Unity. Unity called back the next day. "I've already promised it to Tamara," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "She collects antiques, you know. She really appreciates nice things. Tamara appreciates nice things, right? This is the same woman who once returned a birthday gift. I gave her a scented candle from Target, $15, because it didn't match her aesthetic. Apparently, her aesthetic doesn't include anything that costs less than $50 or comes from a store where normal people shop." Day 13, January 25th. Clayton called. "Hey, Paige," he said, voice dripping with the particular condescension he'd perfected over 34 years of being the favorite. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. Dad's almost finished with Grandma's estate. Didn't want you to worry your pretty little head about the paperwork." My pretty little head? I have a bachelor's degree. I process insurance claims for a living, which involves understanding complex legal documents every single day. But sure, Clayton, protect my delicate feminine brain. He explained that after the apartment was sold and debts were settled, my share of the estate would be approximately $1,847. "Mom didn't have much," he said, actually sounding cheerful about it. "Lived month to month on Social Security, but hey, that's almost $2,000, right? Not bad for doing nothing." Not bad for doing nothing? 7 years of Sundays was nothing. Every holiday, every birthday, every random Tuesday when I just wanted to see her. Nothing. My brother explained estate law to me like I was a golden retriever who'd accidentally wandered into a bank. "You see, Paige, when someone dies, their assets get distributed." I wanted to reach through the phone and shake him. I know what probate means, Clayton. But something about his call, the smugness, the dismissiveness, the absolute certainty that Grandma had been worth exactly as little as they'd always assumed, it made something click in my head. That night, I examined the savings book more carefully. I'd looked at it before, of course, flipped through the entries, seen the final balance, but I hadn't really searched. Tucked into the back pocket, folded small, was a piece of yellowed paper I'd missed before. Grandma's handwriting, smaller than usual, like she'd been trying to fit a secret into the smallest possible space. For Paige, only Paige. The rest we'll understand in time. Account number 7751924, First Northeastern. The book is just the key. Use it. I read it 3 times. The book is just the key. What did that mean? I grabbed my laptop and started searching. First Northeastern Savings and Loan, a small regional bank that operated in northeastern Pennsylvania from 1952 until 1994, when it merged with Northeastern Pennsylvania Bank, which merged with Commonwealth Trust in 2003, which was acquired by Keystone Federal Credit Union in 2011. Bank mergers are like following a family tree, where everyone kept changing their last name. I felt like I needed a conspiracy board with red string connecting everything. But the important thing, Keystone Federal Credit Union still existed. They had a branch in downtown Scranton, and somewhere in their systems, there might still be records connected to account number 7751924. While I was searching through old files for my Social Security card, I'd need it for any bank business, I found something else. A letter from my student loan servicer dated March 2019. It documented a lump sum payment of $11,400 applied to my loans. I remembered this. I'd been confused at the time, thought I'd somehow qualified for a state forgiveness program. I'd applied to several of them, and the paperwork was always so convoluted that I just assumed one had come through. The letter didn't specify the source, just payment received. I remembered calling the servicer back then. The representative said it might be an employer benefit or a state program I'd enrolled in. I didn't question free money. Who questions free money? Now, I stared at that letter with new eyes. $11,400 was a lot of money for someone living on Social Security. A lot of money for someone everyone called poor. Tomorrow morning, I decided, before work, I was going to Keystone Federal Credit Union and I was going to find out what my grandmother was trying to tell me. Probably nothing. The account probably closed in 1989. I'd probably walk out with confirmation that the savings book was exactly what my father said. Useless. But Grandma wrote that note for a reason. She said the book was a key, and I had to know what it unlocked. January 26th, day 14. I arrived at Keystone Federal Credit Union's downtown Scranton branch at 9:15 in the morning. My shift at Keystone Insurance didn't start until 10:30, which gave me just over an hour to either find answers or confirm my father was right about everything. I'd brought documentation. The savings book, my driver's license, grandma's death certificate, my own birth certificate to prove the family relation. I felt like I was applying for a security clearance rather than asking for an old bank account. The branch was quiet. 2 tellers behind the counter, a few early morning customers conducting business, soft music playing from hidden speakers. Completely ordinary. No indication that my life was about to change. I approached the first available teller. Her name tag said Bethany. She looked maybe 23, fresh-faced and eager in that way people are when they're new to a job and still believe customer service can be fulfilling. I placed the savings book on the counter. Bethany stared at it like I'd handed her a stone tablet with ancient runes. "Ma'am," she said slowly, "this account type hasn't existed since, I don't even know, the 80s? 1989, I said. That's the last entry. She typed the account number into her computer, frowned at the screen, typed it again. The frown deepened. "I'm sorry, this account doesn't appear in our system. It was probably closed decades ago when the banks merged. There's nothing I can do." I felt my heart sink. I'd been prepared for this, told myself all morning to expect exactly this outcome, but hearing it still hurt. "Thank you for checking," I said, and I meant it to sound graceful, but it came out flat and tired. I turned to leave. Bethany had looked at the savings book like I'd asked her to process a transaction in ancient Sumerian. To be fair, the book was older than her. It was older than me. It had probably seen more bank mergers than most marriages see anniversaries. I was 3 steps from the door when a voice stopped me. "Excuse me, may I see that?" I turned. An older man was approaching from a desk near the back of the branch. Gray hair, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, the kind of posture that comes from decades of sitting in office chairs. His name tag read, Theodore C., Senior Account Supervisor. "That's a First Northeastern passbook," he said, eyes fixed on the leather book in my hand. "Haven't seen one of those in must be 30 years. I handed it to him carefully. He opened it with a gentleness that surprised me, handling the pages like they were historical documents, which I suppose they were. "Account number 7751924, he murmured. "This is from before we computerized everything, before the mergers, before—" He trailed off, still studying the entries. "Is there any way to find out if the account still exists?" I asked, "or if there are any connected accounts?" Mr. Krantz looked up at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. interest, maybe even curiosity. These savings accounts, he said slowly, were sometimes linked to other products, checking accounts, investment accounts, things that wouldn't show up unless you knew to look for them. He asked me to wait. He needed to access the legacy archive system. I called my supervisor and told her I'd be late. Family emergency. It wasn't even a lie. Then I sat in the bank's small waiting area and watched the clock. I sat in that bank for 2 hours, watching the minute hand like it owed me money. I memorized every poster about mortgage rates. I read the entire brochure about certificates of deposit twice. I developed a personal theory about why the fake plant in the corner was leaning slightly to the left. I think someone bumped it in 2019 and no one's bothered to fix it since. An hour passed, then most of another. I was about to give up. Maybe Mr. Krantz had gotten pulled into other work. Maybe there really was nothing to find. Maybe I should just accept my $1,800 and move on with my life. Then Mr. Krantz emerged from the back office. He was carrying a thick folder, and his expression had changed. He looked like a man who'd found something he wasn't expecting. "Ms. Wilkerson," he said, "could you come with me, please? I'd like to discuss this in private." He led me to a small office and closed the door. The folder sat on the desk between us like a bomb waiting to go off. "The savings account was real," he said, "but it wasn't the main account." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother opened the savings account in 1967 as what we used to call a linked account. It was essentially a checking account for everyday expenses, small deposits, small withdrawals, normal transactions." He opened the folder. But in 1967, she also opened another account, an investment account. She made an initial deposit of $3,500, her entire savings from years of factory work, and then she started making monthly contributions, $30 some months, $50 others, whatever she could spare. I stared at him. My grandmother had an investment account for 34 years? Mr. Krantz said she contributed every month until she retired in 2001, and she never, not once in 57 years, withdrew a single dollar. Every dividend was reinvested, every cent stayed in the account. My grandmother, who I once watched argue with a grocery store cashier over a $7 coupon discrepancy, she had an investment account. My grandmother, who everyone called poor, who my father was embarrassed by, who Unity wanted to put in a facility, she had been investing money since 1967. "There's something else," Mr. Krantz said. "The investment account wasn't in your grandmother's name. It was held in something called the Estelle M. Wilkerson Family Trust. She created the trust in 1998. A trust? A revocable living trust. It's a separate legal entity. When someone searches for accounts under Estelle Wilkerson's name, the trust doesn't appear. You have to know it exists to find it." He paused. "That's why no one knew about it. Your grandmother essentially created a secret compartment. She kept that little savings account visible, the one your father saw. Everything else was hidden." Mr. Krantz picked up a phone. "I need to get my supervisor and possibly someone from our legal compliance team." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Mrs. Fries, the branch manager. She was in her 50s, professional, composed, until she opened the folder Mr. Krantz had compiled. Then something in her face changed. "Ms. Wilkerson," she said, "before I show you this, I need to ask, are you the sole beneficiary listed for Estelle Wilkerson's trust?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I didn't know there was a trust until 10 minutes ago." Mrs. Fries nodded slowly. She pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and slid it across the desk toward me. "The current value of the Estelle M. Wilkerson Family Trust." I looked at the number. I read it again. I read it a third time because my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. $2,341,872.16. "That's not possible," I heard myself say. "My grandmother worked in a textile mill. She clipped coupons. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment for 40 years. Your grandmother made her first deposit of $3,500 in 1967, Mrs. Fries said. She added $30 to $50 every month for 34 years. She reinvested every dividend. She never touched the principal. 57 years of compound growth, Miss Wilkerson. 57 years of patience and discipline. I couldn't speak. The number kept swimming in front of my eyes. $2.3 million. My grandmother? Poor Grandma Estelle, factory worker, coupon clipper, the family burden, had been a secret millionaire. "There's something else you need to know," Mrs. Freeze said, and her voice had grown serious. "Something about why I asked you to wait." She pulled more documents from the folder. Over the past 11 months, there have been multiple attempts to access this trust account. Someone claiming to have power of attorney for Estelle Wilkerson. Someone claiming that Mrs. Wilkerson was mentally incompetent and needed help managing her finances. I felt cold suddenly. Who? Mrs. Freeze showed me the paperwork. The name on the access requests jumped out at me like a slap. Joshua Wilkerson, my father. "We flagged the documents as suspicious," Mrs. Freeze continued. "The power of attorney paperwork had inconsistencies. We required verification before granting access." She pulled out another document. This one was dated June 3rd, 2023. "Your grandmother came into this branch in person, alone. She was 83 years old, and she took 2 buses to get here from Wilkes-Barre." Mrs. Freeze's voice softened. "She provided documentation proving she was mentally competent. She gave a formal statement explicitly blocking Joshua Wilkerson from any access to her accounts, and she updated her trust documents." Updated them how? "She reconfirmed the sole beneficiary. She added additional protections. She made sure everything was airtight." Mrs. Freeze met my eyes. "The sole beneficiary of the Estelle M. Wilkerson Family Trust is you, Miss Wilkerson. Only you. Your grandmother came here 3 months before she died, specifically to make sure her son couldn't take what she wanted you to have." I sat in silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the bank, a phone rang. My grandmother knew. She knew what her son was trying to do. She knew, and she protected me. At 83 years old, taking 2 buses, she came to this bank and made sure I would be safe. "Miss Wilkerson," Mrs. Freeze said, leaning forward, "whatever you do, do not leave this building without speaking to an attorney. Your father attempted to access these funds through false pretenses. Given what's at stake, he may try again. You need legal protection." She handed me a piece of paper with 3 names on it, estate attorneys who had worked with the bank before. "Your grandmother spent 57 years building this. She spent the last year of her life protecting it. Don't let anyone take it from you now." That night, January 26th, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, doing mental math that made no sense. $2.3 million. I could pay off my student loans. I could pay off everyone's student loans. I could buy a house. I could buy several houses. I could finally get that coffee stain cleaned out of my car seat. I could buy a new car and not worry about the stain at all. The possibilities were overwhelming. Also, I was definitely having a panic attack. I didn't tell anyone, not my coworkers, not my few friends, not a single soul. Who would I even tell? Hey, funny story. My dead grandmother was secretly a millionaire, and my father tried to steal her money, and now I'm afraid he's going to come after me? That's not a conversation. That's a therapy session. The next morning, January 27th, I called the 3 attorneys on Mrs. Freeze's list. The first one didn't answer. His voicemail was full. The second one had a receptionist who informed me he was on vacation until February 5th. Would you like to schedule an appointment for when he returns? I would not. I needed help now, not in 10 days. The third name on the list was Adrian Callahan. A tired voice answered on the second ring. "Callahan Law, how can I help you?" I explained my situation as concisely as I could. Deceased grandmother, hidden trust, $2.3 million, father who tried to access the accounts illegally, bank telling me not to leave without legal protection. The line went quiet for a long moment. "Miss Wilkerson," Adrian Callahan said, "can you come to my office tomorrow at 9? Her office was above a sandwich shop on Lackawanna Avenue. The stairs creaked, the hallway smelled of roast beef and pickles. The door had her name in gold letters that were starting to peel. Adrienne herself was not what I expected. Mid-50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose or hanging from a chain around her neck. She wore sensible shoes, the kind nurses wear, built for standing all day. Her leather briefcase looked like it had survived several wars and was prepared to survive several more. She wasn't fancy, she wasn't warm, she was direct. "Let me see everything," she said. I handed over the documents, the savings book, Grandma's note, the paperwork from the bank, the death certificate, everything I had. For 3 hours, Adrienne reviewed it all. She made notes, she asked questions, she made phone calls to the bank while I sat in a worn leather chair and tried not to spiral. Finally, she looked up at me over her reading glasses. "Miss Wilkerson, your grandmother was considerably more sophisticated than anyone gave her credit for. The trust," Adrienne explained, "was specifically designed to bypass probate. That meant it didn't go through the normal estate process, the one my father was managing. The trust transferred directly to the named beneficiary upon death. No court input, no family inquiry. Named beneficiary, Paige Marie Wilkerson. Only Paige. Your grandmother came here 3 months before she died, specifically to make sure her son couldn't take what she wanted you to have." "But he's going to fight it," I said. "He's going to say she was confused or that I manipulated her or—" Adrienne held up a hand. "Let him try. The bank has documented his attempts to access the account using questionable power of attorney documents. They have your grandmother's statement, given in person at age 83, explicitly blocking his access and confirming her mental competence. If he claims she was incompetent, we show the court that she was competent enough to come to the bank herself and stop him." She paused. "Your grandmother built a fortress, Miss Wilkerson. She just didn't tell anyone where the walls were." I realized I hadn't asked the most important question. I can't afford a lawyer. I have maybe $4,000 in savings. Adrienne waved her hand dismissively. "Estate work like this is contingency. I take a percentage of the inheritance when everything is resolved. Standard rate is 5% for straightforward cases, up to 10% for contested ones. You don't pay me until you get your money. If you get nothing, I get nothing." She smiled. The first smile I'd seen from her. "That's how you know I'll work hard." Over the next few days, the full picture emerged. The trust documents included a key to a storage unit, Secure Store Self-Storage on Route 315 in Pittston, Unit 47, paid up through 2025. Adrienne and I drove there together on January 29th. The unit was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet. Inside, 3 cardboard boxes, a small metal filing cabinet, and years of accumulated dust. We spent 3 days going through everything. My grandmother's record-keeping was not what I'd call organized. It was chaos with a purpose. Notes scrawled on napkins, entries in old spiral notebooks with coffee stains on the covers, calculations on the backs of electric bills, receipts stuffed into envelopes with cryptic labels like Important 2019 and Keep Proof. Adrienne said, "My grandmother structured her finances like a financial matryoshka doll, layer after layer of hidden compartments." I said, "I thought she was just the lady who liked butterscotch candies." Adrienne looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "The butterscotch was probably a tax write-off." But the information was there. 20-plus years of documentation, investment statements showing the slow, steady growth of her portfolio, $3,500 in 1967, monthly contributions of $30 to $50 for 34 years, reinvested dividends, compound interest, doing what compound interest does when you leave it alone for half a century. Family documentation, too. Dates of visits, phone calls received or not received, birthdays remembered by whom. She'd kept track of everything with the precision of an accountant or a woman who knew she might need evidence someday. There were entries about Joshua, Specific incidents, specific quotes. The time he told her she was embarrassing at Clayton's wedding. The time he suggested she should downsize to a smaller apartment so he wouldn't have to drive so far to visit. The time he didn't visit at all for 7 months, and then complained about the parking when he finally showed up. There were entries about Unity, too, including the exact date Unity suggested putting Grandma in a facility. November 28th, 2019. Thanksgiving. Unity had said it right there at the dinner table, with Grandma sitting 3 feet away as if she were a piece of furniture being discussed for donation. There were entries about Clayton, every visit logged with duration. The most common entry, 20 minutes, phone in hand the whole time. And there were entries about me. Every Sunday for 7 years. What we talked about, what pastries I brought, how I was doing at work, whether I seemed happy or stressed or tired. She'd noticed everything. On February 2nd, buried at the bottom of the filing cabinet, I found a sealed envelope for Paige after I'm gone. My hand shook as I opened it. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten in Grandma's careful script, the same handwriting from the savings book, the same handwriting from 20 years of napkin notes and electric bill calculations. She explained everything. She started investing in 1967 because she grew up during hard times and never trusted anyone else with her security. She'd seen what happened to people who depended on others. She'd seen women left with nothing when husbands died or left. She swore she would never be helpless. She never touched the money because she never needed it. Social Security covered her modest life. The apartment was enough. The simple pleasures were enough. She didn't need fancy things. She needed security. And she had it, more than anyone knew. She'd watched Joshua become someone she didn't recognize. Her own son, embarrassed by her work, dismissive of her life, always calculating what he might inherit. She saw it all. She documented it all. "You're the only one who saw me as a person, not a burden," she wrote. "You're the only one who came because you wanted to, not because you felt obligated. 7 years of Sundays, Paige. Do you know what that meant to me? You were the only one who made me feel like I still mattered. Joshua is my son, but I know what he is. He'll try to take this from you. Don't let him. This money is yours. You earned it in ways he never will, with time and attention and love." At the bottom of the letter, a postscript. "That student loan payment in 2019, that was me. You never asked for help, but I wanted you to know someone was paying attention. Someone always was." $11,400, not a state program, not an employer benefit. My grandmother, on her fixed income, saving me from drowning in debt and never saying a word. I sat in that storage unit, surrounded by cardboard boxes and old receipts, and I cried for the first time since she died. Adrienne gave me a moment. Then she said gently but firmly, "Your father is going to find out about this money soon. The bank has already denied his latest access request. When he calls asking why, they'll tell him the account was closed and funds transferred to the designated beneficiary. He's going to come to you." She was right. I needed to be ready. "What do I do when he does?" Adrienne considered the question. "You listen to what they offer. Don't agree to anything. Tell them you need time to think about any proposal." She handed me a folder with copies of key documents, Grandma's records, the bank's fraud documentation, selected entries from the notebooks. "Keep the originals here with me," she said, "but take copies. Sometimes showing evidence ends negotiations faster than months of back and forth." She reminded me of one more thing. Pennsylvania is a 2-party consent state. Don't record the conversation without everyone's agreement. Anything recorded without consent is inadmissible and potentially criminal. Just listen, watch, and remember what they say. February 13th. That evening, Joshua and Unity's house was a 4-bedroom colonial in a nice development in Clark Summit, the kind of neighborhood where everyone has matching mailboxes and judges each other's lawn care. 2 cars in the driveway, the leased Lexus and Unity's pearl white Cadillac XT5. Inside the house looked like a furniture catalog. Everything coordinated, everything staged, nothing that looked actually lived in. Clayton and Tamara were already there when I arrived. Clayton in a golf shirt, like he'd just come from the country club. Tamara in an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, examining her manicure like it was more interesting than any conversation I might offer. Unity had made a roast. The table was set with what I recognized as Grandma's china, the vintage finds she'd been so excited to post about, using my grandmother's dishes to serve dinner to the family that ignored her. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was friendly. It was the warmest reception I'd ever received in this house. It was terrifying. We made small talk through the appetizers. The weather, Clayton's job, Tamara's kitchen renovation. Apparently, the countertops had been a nightmare to source. First world problems discussed with the gravity of international crisis. Then, over the main course, Joshua cleared his throat. Paige, I know things have been confusing since Mom passed. His voice was measured, rehearsed. And I know there were some assets we weren't aware of. That was a surprise to all of us. He was still using we, still talking like he had a stake in this. I want to propose something fair. Family fair. Mom would have wanted us to share, to take care of each other. That's what family does. He laid out his offer. I would receive $500,000. The remaining $1.8 million would be split among Joshua, Clayton, and the family, meaning Unity and Tamara would somehow benefit too. That's still more money than you've ever seen, Paige, Joshua said, smiling like he was doing me a favor. $500,000. You could quit your job, buy a house, and it keeps the family together. Everyone wins. Everyone at the table was nodding. Unity, Clayton, even Tamara looked up from her nails long enough to arrange her face into something resembling supportive. They'd planned this, rehearsed it. $500,000 for me to go away quietly while they split the rest. My hands were shaking under the table. I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed what I would say, but sitting here, surrounded by their coordinated smiles and calculated warmth, all my prepared words evaporated. So I just reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Before I respond to that, I said, I need to show you something. I opened the folder and laid the first document on the table, right next to the roast. March 15th, 2023. Joshua Wilkerson submitted power of attorney documents to Keystone Federal Credit Union, claiming authority over Estelle Wilkerson's accounts. My father's smile flickered. I laid down the second document. June 3rd, 2023, Estelle Wilkerson, Grandma, went to the bank in person. She was 83 years old. She took 2 buses to get there. She filed a formal statement confirming that she was mentally competent, and she explicitly blocked you from accessing any of her accounts. I looked at my father. She knew, Dad. She knew what you were trying to do. Joshua's face had gone still, not angry yet, confused, calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew. Those documents don't mean what you think, he said carefully. I was trying to help her. She was getting older, and I wanted to make sure her finances were in order. She wasn't confused. I cut him off. She came to the bank herself. She updated her trust documents 4 months before she died. The bank has her on record as sharp and competent. She knew exactly what she was doing. I pulled out more papers. Grandma kept records of everything. I showed them the evidence: dates of visits, duration of stays, phone calls made and not made, birthdays remembered and forgotten. She wrote down every time you visited, Dad, every phone call, every birthday you forgot. I turned to Unity. She wrote down when you suggested putting her in a facility, November 28th, 2019, Thanksgiving dinner. You said it right in front of her like she wasn't even there. Unity's face drained of color. I looked at Clayton. She logged every one of your visits, every single one. Average duration, 20 minutes. Clayton stared at the table. She left me a letter, I continued. My voice was shaking now, but I kept going. She explained why I'm the sole beneficiary. She said I was the only one who saw her as a person, the only one who visited because I wanted to, not because of obligation. I gathered the papers back into the folder. She knew exactly who all of you were. She watched, she documented, and she planned accordingly. For 26 years, she planned. Joshua stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice had lost his warmth. "I'm her son, her only son. I have rights. I'll contest this. I'll prove she was mentally incompetent when she made that trust, and I'll submit the bank's documentation showing you tried to access her accounts with false paperwork," I said quietly. "I'll submit her handwritten records. I'll submit the statement she gave in person proving she was competent enough to stop you." I stood up too. "You try to claim she was incompetent, and every court will see the same thing. A son who tried to steal from his elderly mother, and a mother who was smart enough to see it coming and stop him." The room was silent. "Grandma left you something, by the way." I looked at my father. $1, with a note. His jaw tightened. "What note?" "It says, 'So you can't say I forgot you. I remember everything.'" I turned to Clayton. "She left you $1 too. Your note says, 'For all the birthdays you didn't quite make it to.'" I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. No one followed me. No one said goodbye. I drove home in silence, hands still trembling on the steering wheel. It wasn't a triumphant moment. It wasn't satisfying. It was painful and ugly and sad. But it was done. They knew what I knew. They knew what Grandma knew, and there was nothing they could do to change any of it. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It means the world to me. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now, let me tell you how it ended. The days after that dinner were hard, not because I doubted my decision, but because my family didn't give up easily. February 14th, Unity called me crying. "Paige, please," she sobbed. "You're tearing this family apart. Your father made mistakes, but he's still your father. Can't we just work something out? Can't you just be reasonable?" I told her I wasn't doing anything to the family. I was receiving what Grandma chose to give me. That was all. "But it's not fair," Unity wailed. "We're his family too. We deserve." I hung up. February 16th, Clayton called with a different approach. Calm, reasonable, still condescending, but trying to hide it. "Look, Paige, I get it. You won. Fine." He sighed, like he was being incredibly generous. "But let's be smart about this. Let's think long term." His new proposal? I keep $800,000, give $1.5 million back to the family. "That's still almost $1 million, Paige," he said. "More money than you'll ever need with your lifestyle." I asked him what lifestyle he meant. "You know," he said, "simple, modest, you." I told him my simple lifestyle now included a very expensive attorney who billed by the hour, and I wasn't interested in subsidizing his kitchen renovation. On February 21st, Adrian filed a formal complaint with the Lackawanna County District Attorney's Office. The charge? Attempted elder financial exploitation. In Pennsylvania, that's a felony of the 3rd degree, up to 7 years in prison. I wasn't seeking the maximum, I just wanted protection. As long as Joshua could claim the trust was created by a mentally incompetent woman, he could keep fighting. The criminal case would prove once and for all that Grandma knew exactly what she was doing, and that Joshua was the one who'd acted wrongfully. The investigation took months. The DA's office reviewed everything. Bank records of Joshua's access attempts, his questionable power of attorney documents, Grandma's formal statement, her handwritten records. Joshua hired a criminal defense attorney, a good one, expensive. Meanwhile, the legal fees mounted. By June, Unity discovered that Joshua had spent over $40,000 on attorneys. Their savings were nearly gone. When he suggested taking a second mortgage on the house to cover ongoing costs, Unity made a different calculation. She quietly consulted her own lawyer. She learned that if she filed for divorce before a conviction, she could protect her share of their assets. If she waited, after everything, might be seized for legal debts and restitution. Unity filed for divorce by the end of June. Irreconcilable differences, the paperwork said. I had another phrase for it: rats leaving a sinking ship. In July, the probate process for the trust was completed. My inheritance was officially confirmed. $2,341,872.16. August brought the plea deal. The DA offered terms: plead guilty to attempted financial exploitation, a reduced charge, accept 3 years of probation, and carry a felony conviction on his permanent record. No jail time, but a criminal record that would follow him forever. Joshua's attorney advised him to take it. Fighting would cost more money he didn't have. The evidence was overwhelming. He would probably lose a trial and face harsher sentencing. My father, the man who'd built his whole identity around success and status and being better than where he came from, pleaded guilty to trying to steal from his own mother. The court records became public. In October, Keystone Medical Supply conducted their routine background check update. Company policy was clear: no employees with felony convictions, especially for financial crimes. Joshua worked in medical supply sales, a position involving billing, insurance claims, handling controlled inventory. A felony conviction for financial fraud was an automatic disqualification. After 15 years with the company, Joshua Wilkerson was terminated. At 58 years old, with a felony on his record, he was unemployable in his field. Nobody hires a convicted financial criminal to handle their accounts. The house went up for sale in November. Legal debts, divorce settlement, no income. The Lexus went back to the dealer. He couldn't afford the lease payments anymore. The man who'd thrown a savings book on a grave because he thought it was worthless found himself worth considerably less than the paper it was printed on. Clayton distanced himself almost immediately after the plea deal. His pharmaceutical company didn't want the association. Family of a convicted criminal wasn't good for the corporate image. He stopped returning Joshua's calls. He and Tamara moved to a different part of the state. Last I heard, they were reconsidering their priorities. In November, I received the official inheritance transfer: $2,341,872.16. minus Adrian's 6% fee, $140,512, minus federal and state taxes, approximately $280,000, net to me, roughly $1.92 million. I know that sounds like I'm complaining about fees and taxes, and I want to be absolutely clear, I am not complaining. But I did spend one full evening Googling how to invest money when you have no idea what you're doing, and can you buy too many index funds, and what is a fiduciary, and do I need one? My grandmother would have been disappointed. She'd have a spreadsheet muddy by hour 2. In December, a package arrived from Adrian's office. Inside was the wooden music box from 1961, my grandmother's wedding gift, the one Unity had promised to Tamara. The trust documents had specifically listed to Paige, my wedding music box. The song is Moon River. Play it and think of me. I opened it. The mechanism was old, the song slightly warped with age, but it still played. I sat in my apartment and listened to those tinkling notes and thought about all the Sundays I'd heard that same song while Grandma and I drank tea and talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. Inside the box, tucked carefully in the velvet lining, was a photograph. Paige and Estelle, me and Grandma sitting on her tiny balcony, teacups in hand, both of us smiling. On the back, in her handwriting, "My favorite days were Sundays with you." I drove to Hillside Cemetery a few days later. The headstone had been placed then. Simple granite, just her name and dates, no elaborate epitaph. She wouldn't have wanted anything fancy. I brought the savings book with me, the one Joshua had thrown on the grave, the one I'd picked up that cold January evening. I didn't leave it there. I kept it. Some things aren't meant to be discarded just because someone else decided they were worthless. Some people measure love in dollars. My grandmother measured it in Sundays, and she counted every single one. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched you, more of my most gripping stories are already waiting on your screen. Click one now. I promise you're going to love it. See you in the next one.